All right, so if you were with us last week, we went through chapter 20, and chapter 20 was really sad. It was about a son being betrayed by his father. It was about Jonathan coming to learn that Saul had betrayed his trust and everything. Like, he really did believe that his father was a good man, and he wasn't able to recognize the depths of depravity that his father had fallen into, and how bad things have gotten. And now David and Jonathan, the two best friends, will never be able to see each other again, because Jonathan is a good and loyal son. He's going to stay by his father, even though his father is wrong, because he knows his duty, he knows his commitment. But David, in order to be safe, needs to leave. And you'll remember, so it said that he left, and it says, where did David go? Verse 21, chapter 21, verse 1, says, David went to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked him, why are you alone, and why is no one with you? Now, there's a couple, it's not 100% certain why he trembled, but we know David's got a reputation, right? And we're going to get to that later in this chapter. David has such a reputation, it goes way before him everywhere he goes, right? David is a warrior. David is a champion. David is a general, a leader. David is a hero amongst them. And so whether this was like, trepid, I can't believe I'm meeting him, or fear, we're not entirely sure. It doesn't say, but we know that David's presence had an effect on this priest who serves before God. This is the type of man that David is, right? And it's helping us to understand who David is. David isn't just that little boy who was shepherding out in the fields anymore. He is a phenom. He is someone who is recognized everywhere he goes. David is known. And David answered Ahimelech the priest, the king sent me on a mission and said to me, no one is to know anything about this mission I am sending you on. And as for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find. And of course, why is David saying this? Because he's trying to get out of there, right? He needs to get out of Israel. He needs to get safe. He needs to get away. And so he went to the one place he knew he would be safe. He went to a temple, and he went to the tabernacle, and he's trying to find out, okay, where am I going to be able to get food? I know what I can get, and we're going to see right here. The priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women. David replied, indeed, women have been kept from us as usual. Whenever I set out, the men's bodies are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much so today? Okay, that's verse 5. And I want to pause there because maybe that seems a little bit weird. Wait, why is this? Remember, almost everything God has done in the Old Testament, right? If we were talking about the Exodus, where we're talking about the 10 plagues, all 10 plagues, by the way, and I don't know if I've ever talked about it here, but we've talked about it in the Seder. I've certainly talked about it with the kids before. Each and every one of those plagues is designed as a affront or a confrontation to an Egyptian god to say, I am the one in control. God is sovereign. God reigns. God is supreme. And even so with this particular act, it may not seem like much to you, right, where he talks about, withholding himself from sexual relations with a woman. But why was that important? Because many of the other rites, many of the other practices of the surrounding religions and stuff like that were all around sexual rituals, sexual conduct. And so God was separating himself out from that, saying, I am not that. I am something different, and we're going to keep ourselves consecrated and pure and holy. And this is going to come in, and there's going to be something else we're going to look at here today. So the priest then gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread except for the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. Now, many of us, we don't go to sacrificial temple. We don't have to do any of this thing. This isn't a thing that happens anymore. What on earth is the bread of the presence? And one of the things that I want to take note of and make a point of saying is, have you ever noticed, and this was something that was obviously imparted to me by one of my professors that I respected deeply. He's like, have you ever noticed how each and every one of the sacrifices required at the temple, right? We just finished talking about there was a lot of sexual practices and other horrific sacrificial practices that were happening in other religions and the cults around them, including sacrificing your children, right? You would literally burn your babies alive. And yet God, what sacrifices does God demand? Food, wheat, grain, drink, meat, bread. Interesting, isn't it? How different it is. It's almost like we're doing this thing for God. And so one of the things that is important to notice about this bread is this bread was bread that was baked every single day. It was placed in the presence of God in the temple, in the tabernacle at this point. And it was just to remain in the presence of God for that day. And then the next day when the new bread came in, that bread was to feed the Levites who were working there. That was their bread. That was their food that they got to eat. Now because David is who he is, David has the reputation that he has. In fact, this priest is actually willing to hand over this precious gift that they have for themselves, this food, the sustenance that they have for themselves, and he's willing to give it over to David. And that is why there is this bread. I've just heard it said before, people are like, oh, this is really weird that he ate the bread of the presence. No, the bread of the presence was always eaten. It wasn't ever just left to rot. Like literally, it was just always eaten by someone else the next day, including a lot of the other sacrifices. When a grain offering was brought, or when a cow offering, or any of these other animals, the lambs and stuff like that, when they were sacrificed, the meat wasn't just left there to spoil. It would literally be taken away. Right? They would burn away the fat, the entrails, and all the other stuff, and they would take away the meat, and the meat would actually be sustenance. Right? It was more of a barbecue and less of a big stinking mess. But it's amazing to me that is the type of God, that is the type of system that God set up. We tend to think of it as this violent, horrible, bloody thing, but it was always a ritual of sustenance. It was always even in our sacrifices to God, God is still providing for us. I just find that incredible personally. I think that is a wonderful thing. And it's gonna come back around here as we come to the end of the chapter. See, now one of Saul's servants was there that day, and he detained before the Lord. He was Doeg, the Edomite, Saul's chief shepherd. So there's someone there. David's trying to remain low-key, and now Saul's going to know he was there. His position has been compromised. David asked Ahimelech, don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought the sword or any other weapon because the king's mission was urgent. And I want to urge you, don't do what I did. He's not going to kill him, okay? He's just trying to get out. He just needs a weapon. The priest replied, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It's wrapped in cloth behind the ephod, and if you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one. And David said, there is none like it. Give it to me. And from there, we know that David, verse 10, that day David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Does that name sound familiar? If it doesn't, let me make it clear for you. Goliath was from Gath. Gath is one of the Philistine cities. Gath is an enemy, a blood enemy of David. They want him dead. And yet that is how far things have gone to this point, where David must seek refuge amongst his enemies. The servants of Achish said to him, isn't this David the king of this land? Isn't he the one that they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands. This is exactly why Saul is afraid of David. David's reputation has grown so great that even his enemies now think that he is the one in control. Of course, in reality, they're right. They know, God is setting David up to be in control. God is setting David up to be king. But this is exactly why Saul is so threatened by David, is that even his enemies are beginning to believe in David over him. Said David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors and the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. He was willing to suffer an indignity. He was willing to take wounds to his pride rather than suffer at the hands of Saul. Achish said to his servants, "Look at this man, he is insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house?" Okay, so that's 21. What did we learn? David, man. First off, I love David. And David, once again, is demonstrating to us the lengths that he's willing to go to follow God. Why is that significant? He, as I said, he was willing to suffer indignities. He was willing to humiliate himself by going into the hands of his enemy. He was willing to give up all of his dignity and pretend to be insane. He was willing to suffer all of this because he would not turn against the Lord's anointed. He said, "God, if you've put Saul in charge, then only you can take him out." And it didn't matter because we've said it before. And look at here, even his enemy thinks that he's king. Do you really think it would have been hard for David to overthrow Saul? Of course not. David could have easily done it, but it is his devotion to the Lord that has driven him here. And now here's where we're going to take our weird left turn, and probably none of you are going to see this coming, but it came to me in a vision as I was praying about this, and I said, "God, how on earth I don't understand how this works with us today." And then, boom. Men, I want to ask you a question. This is for men. Don't worry, I got a women question after. Men, when you get married, who are you committed to? Okay, your wife is a pretty big thing here. Let's not, I feel like I'm doing a Sunday school class where yeah, it's Jesus. Is the answer Jesus? Okay. It's your wife. If you're committed to God, by the way, okay, if that's your answer, then your answer should be very swiftly followed by your wife. Very swiftly. Why? What does the Bible say? And I want us to take a look at that, by the way. See, too often I think when we talk about these things, we talk about them from our culture standpoint, what our culture expects us to do. But guess what? I don't care. I'm here. I want to be a man of God. I want to serve the Lord. I want to understand what He expects of me, not what the world expects of me. So what does God expect of me as a husband? What does that look like? And men, what does that look like? What do you think that looks like? What does the Bible actually tell us that we're supposed to be? Anyone can spit something out. It's okay. You're probably going to get it somewhat close. John, your wife's not here. It's a perfect time to say it. Yeah, but he doesn't have a microphone. Sure, defender. That's a great one. You provide security. How about just general provision? You're supposed to help meet her needs, make sure your family's cared for, right? You're supposed to be there both for her physical and her mental health. You're supposed to actually care about them. You're supposed to show compassion. By the way, these aren't it would be nice ifs. These are Jesus has required you to, as a husband, to meet these needs. To sacrifice for your wife, to honor your wife as if she was your own body, to love her that much, to be willing to die for her. Now, ladies, if you have a man who is that committed to you, how would or how do you want to treat that man? Respect, sure. Submission. By the way, submission is like this dirty word in our culture today. That just means that you're willfully putting yourself under someone else's authority. By the way, we do that all the time. We just like to rename it. It's kind of like we don't like to call people secretaries anymore. We go, it's administrative assistant. It's less degrading. No, it's the same job. Let's stop pretending. Help me, sure. But here's the thing. God doesn't have to require that from you. Here's the thing. When someone treats you that well, when someone acts that good towards you, it's almost this natural overflowing from your heart. Does God ask these things from you? Absolutely. He says, look, you need to love and serve your husband, by the way, as he's loving and serving you. And guess what? When you're actually in this mutual respect relationship, when things are going well, guess what? It's not difficult. There are going to be challenges, yes, but it's easy to love someone who's loving you. Isn't that right? It's not a challenge. Why am I tying marriage into this? Because here's a difficult truth that for some reason, I don't understand why, but a lot of men actually tend to struggle with this particular fact, and this comes right from the mouth of Christ, okay? We as Christians are the bride of Christ. We're the bride. And that means that comes with all that entails. Now, I want to ask you, from a biblical perspective, what we just laid out, according to the roles between a husband and a wife, who has a greater responsibility? Not according to our culture, but according to the Bible. Men. Thank you. Why is this important? Because Jesus is the bridegroom. Marriage is meant to be a reflection of the relationship that we have with Christ. It means that, guess what? Jesus has taken all that responsibility. Jesus is going to shoulder the burden. Jesus is going to take care of those deeds. Jesus is going to maintain those things. We can try and split this up and break it up, and guess what? I know it's not a popular thing to say because people tie so many negative words and feelings and emotions to the idea of headship and leadership, but guess what? I didn't say tyranny. I didn't say dictatorship. I said leadership. A good leader isn't a tyrant, but they lead. They lead by example. And they're at the front. One of my favorite, one movie, it's a terrible movie, as in like it's terrible writing and stuff like that, but it has this one great moment that I always remember, and it's the movie 10,000 BC. If any of you have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It's a terrible movie, but there's a great moment between these two men, and he's talking about what it means to be a good man. He says a good man draws a circle around himself and his family, and he protects that. That's his. A greater man draws one around his tribe, and a greater man draws an even bigger circle. And so the whole point is that to be a good man, guess what? You need to take responsibility for more than just yourself. This is the type of life that David lived. But guess what? David also understood something else. He also understood, maybe not in this particular terms, but he understood the heart of it. He understood that if you're going to go after the heart of God, then you need to recognize the place of lordship that the Lord plays in your life. That God is doing these things. He is taking care of you. He is leading you. He is directing you, guiding you. He is protecting you. And because of that, although in 1 Corinthians we read that all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial, what does that mean? It means that, guess what? If your heart isn't out there to please the Lord, then your priorities are all messed up. Look at what God has done for you. Look at what the world has done for you. I mean, we see it time and time again in marriages where things get dysfunctional, where either the man isn't willing to live up to his side or the woman doesn't live up to her side, and then the marriages just fall apart, they disintegrate, they break down. Why? Because we're not willing to embrace the cooperative harmony that God has laid out for us. Jesus is the bridegroom. We are the bride. And it's time that we took a page out of David's book, that we embrace our role in our relationship with God and recognize, you know what? Yeah. God gave us this little microcosm to be able to look at and understand, be able to understand relationships with each other. But moreover, it should help us understand our relationship with Him. He doesn't rule us like a tyrant. He doesn't tell us what to do or how to behave or how to act. Instead, in the book of Hosea, we see a God who gets on his knees and begs us when we've been the harlot and walked away from him. He loves us that much that he would suffer indignities for us. So what are you willing to do for him? Are you willing to be like David? To literally end up in the hands of your enemies because you're unwilling to do wrong? You're unwilling to do evil? Are you willing to have that hard line? To say, you know what, I refuse to do wrong. I refuse to do evil because it would compromise my faith, my beliefs. Or are you like the world and saying, well, my favorite line in the movie Kingdom of Heaven, convert to Islam, repent later. That was spoken by one of the priests, by the way. And I was like, yeah, that's the problem with our world. That's how we feel. We'll do what it takes right now in this moment, and we'll ask for forgiveness later. Look, God may forgive. But is that who you want to be? Is that the type of person you want to be? Just scumming your way through life? Doing the bare minimum? Or do you want to show your gratitude, your respect, your love and admiration and adoration for the Lord, just as David did, even when things are difficult? And with that, I want to go to a time of prayer because it can be a challenge. By the way, I don't say this to say I'm a perfect husband. Rebecca and I argue, believe it or not. She sometimes wins the arguments. But I would say largely because we understand our roles biblically, we understand who we are meant to be. We understand that we play a different role in each other's lives, that I need to take care of her. I need to make sure that things are provided for and things are happening. And as a result, I don't have to ask her to do things. Things happen because we just naturally flow into this state the way that God created it to be. It's never perfect, but it's good. And I'm glad that it is because it helps me to remember this is how I ought to live with Jesus. And